The hall was filled with bright lights and soft music. Hundreds of chairs lined the room, and every seat was taken. People had flown in from across the world: scientists, engineers, world leaders, students, parents. It was a rare kind of gathering, meant not for celebration of power, but for inspiration. Tonight was the Global Tech and Humanity Summit, and Sundar Pichai was the keynote speaker. As Sundar walked onto the stage, applause echoed around him. But inside, his heart was not calm. He had given hundreds of speeches before at Google, at universities, at world events. But tonight felt different, not because of the cameras or the large crowd, but because of who sat in the front row. His mother, Lakshmi Pichai, was seated right at the center. Beside her sat the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, two faces from very different parts of his life, yet both had shaped who he was. He had invited them both, thinking it would be an honor. He hadn't expected it to feel this heavy. Sundar stepped up to the microphone, smiled gently, and began. "When I was a child in Chennai, I used to sleep on the floor," he said, his voice clear but soft. "We had one fan for the entire house. My brother and I would wait for our turn under it." A few people chuckled warmly. "My mother used to work hard every day. She would wake up early, cook for all of us, and never complain. My father would ride his scooter to work and fix electrical parts. They never had much, but they gave me everything." He paused, his eyes glancing toward Lakshmi. She smiled, her hands folded in her lap. Her eyes, full of quiet strength, watched him with pride, but also something else. A sadness, maybe, or a memory. Sundar looked back to the audience. "People think success comes from talent or hard work alone, but I believe it also comes from small kindnesses, from people who believe in you before you believe in yourself." A soft murmur went through the crowd. Sundar took a breath, ready to continue. But then something strange happened. He froze. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. His throat tightened. His hands began to tremble slightly at his sides, in front of hundreds of people. Sundar Pichai, one of the most powerful tech leaders in the world, could not speak for a long moment. No one moved. Then Lakshmi stood up quietly. Without saying a word, she stepped forward. The audience watched as this elderly woman in a simple sari climbed the short steps to the stage. She didn't take the microphone. She didn't whisper in his ear. She simply walked to her son, stood beside him, and gently held his hand. Then, to everyone's surprise, Narendra Modi stood up too. He walked forward, climbed the stage, and stood on Sundar's other side. He leaned toward the microphone and said, "Sometimes even the strongest men need a moment to breathe. This is not weakness. This is humanity." The crowd remained silent, but something shifted. Sundar looked at his mother, then at the Prime Minister, and back at the audience. The fear in his eyes slowly faded. "Thank you," he whispered. Then he turned to the microphone again. "My voice stopped because I remembered something I never shared before," he said slowly, emotion thick in his voice. "When I got my scholarship to study in the US, I wanted to give up. I thought I wouldn't make it, but my mother sold her bangles, to buy my ticket. She didn't even tell me. I only found out after I landed in America." A gasp moved through the crowd. Lakshmi's eyes shimmered with tears, but she didn't speak. Her grip on his hand stayed firm. "I stand here because of love," Sundar said, his voice now steady. "Because of sacrifice. Because one woman believed in me when the world didn't know my name." People stood up in silence, one by one. The entire room rose, not in applause, but in quiet respect. And in that moment, the story of Sundar Pichai was no longer about technology. It was about something far greater. It was about a mother. After the speech ended, the applause came not loud, not wild, but slow, steady, and full of feeling. People clapped with respect, not just for Sundar's story, but for the truth in it. No stage lights, no spotlight could outshine that simple moment. And yet, Sundar stepped off the stage, feeling more exposed than ever. He had told a story that wasn't in his notes. He had shown a side of himself the world had never seen. The weight of that honesty stayed on his shoulders as he walked backstage. Lakshmi followed him slowly. She didn't rush or ask questions. When she reached him, Sundar turned around and looked into her eyes. "I never meant to say it like that," he whispered. "I just remembered." She smiled gently. "Some truths come when we least expect them," she said. "And some truths need silence before they're ready to speak." He looked down. He hadn't cried on stage, but now, in front of his mother, the tears began to fall quietly. She didn't wipe them. She didn't tell him to be strong. She just stood there with him. Nera, Ndra. Modi joined them moments later. His expression was calm, serious. "You reminded people what matters," he said to Sundar. "But you also reminded yourself." Sundar nodded, unsure of what to say. "I didn't plan for any of that," he replied. "It felt like something inside me just broke open." Modi looked at Lakshmi, then back to Sundar. "Sometimes, a crack is what lets the light come through." Later that evening, after the crowd left and the cameras were packed away, Sundar sat with his mother in a quiet corner of the venue. No security, no fans, just them. "I want to ask you something," Sundar said softly. Lakshmi turned to him. "Ask. Why didn't you tell me about the bangles before?" She looked away for a second, her hands folded in her lap. "Because I didn't want you to carry the weight of my choice," she said. "You had a world to chase. I had only one thing to protect your belief in yourself." Those words hit him hard. He remembered being 22, standing at the airport, confused and nervous, holding a suitcase that barely closed. He had felt poor, unsure, and invisible. But now he understood. He had never been alone. "What were you thinking when I left?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "I was thinking, I hope the world sees what I see in him." They sat in silence again. Not the empty kind, but the warm kind, the kind that holds years of memories between mother and son. Then Lakshmi asked something unexpected. "Do you remember your speech at your graduation from Stanford?" He laughed softly, barely. "I was so nervous." "You sent me a copy." "Yes," he said, smiling. "You kept it." She nodded. Double quotes. "I didn't understand most of the words. Too much English," she said, laughing. "But one line stayed with me." Sundar looked at her, curious. "You said, technology must connect people, not replace them." He was surprised she remembered that. "You wrote that before smartphones were everywhere," she added. "Before AI, before the world changed. But the line still matters." Sundar leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "Maybe I forgot that," he whispered. "Maybe I got so busy building the future, I stopped looking at the people standing beside me." Lakshmi reached for his hand. Again. "Then tonight was a good reminder," she said gently. The next morning, the story of Sundar's speech had gone viral. Clips were everywhere. People talked not just about his words, but about the silence in between, when he stopped, when his mother stood up, when a prime minister stood with them. Headlines called it the most human moment in tech history. News anchors repeated his line about love, about sacrifice. Students wrote blogs. Parents cried, watching it on their phones. And yet, Sundar stayed quiet. No interviews, no tweets. He flew back home to Chennai with his mother, needing the air of old roads, the sound of familiar doors, and the smell of warm sambar from the kitchen. They walked through their old neighborhood, where people came out to greet them, to touch Lakshmi's hand, to hug Sundar. A small boy ran up and asked, "Are you the man who cried on TV?" Sundar knelt down, smiled, and said, "Yes." The boy looked up at him and whispered, "My mama sold her earrings so I could go to school." Sundar hugged him, his eyes wet again. In that moment, he understood something new. What happened on that stage was not weakness, it was a door. A door others had been waiting for, to step forward with their own stories. Back at home, Sundar sat alone on the rooftop as night fell. The city lights blinked far away, and the stars above stayed still. He thought about the future, not the future of machines, but of people. He thought about what he owed, and slowly, quietly, he began to plan something that wasn't in a business plan, something that could only come from a broken moment, that became whole again. The morning air in Chennai was warm and filled with the sound of birds and temple bells. Sundar sat at the small wooden table on the balcony, a notebook open in front of him. It had been years since he had written anything by hand, but today felt different. He didn't want a screen between his thoughts and the page. Lakshmi walked out with a cup of coffee. She placed it next to him without saying a word. She could tell from the look on his face that he was thinking deeply. "What are you writing?" she finally asked. "An idea," Sundar said quietly. "Maybe more than an idea. Maybe a promise." She sat down beside him. A promise to who? He looked at her, his eyes soft but clear. "To everyone who never had a voice on the stage," he said. "To every child who's brilliant but unseen. To every parent who sacrifices silently. I want to build something for them." She nodded slowly. "You always dream big. This time, it's not about size. It's about truth." He explained his plan in slow words, not rushing, not trying to impress. He wanted to create a global scholarship program, not just for grades, not just for top schools, but for potential, for kindness, for effort, and not just money. Mentorship, support, and community. "Most people fall through the cracks," he said. "I want to fill the cracks." He paused and smiled. "I want to name it after you." Lakshmi shook her head, eyes widening. "No, Sundar, you don't need to do that. I already wrote it down," he said. "The Lakshmi Foundation." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "It's not my name people need. It's your actions." He reached out and held her hand. "Your name is my action." The next day, Sundar made a quiet call to Narendra Modi. The Prime Minister answered with his usual calm voice. "How are you, Sundar?" "Grateful," Sundar replied, "and ready." Modi listened as Sundar explained his idea, not as a businessman, not as a CEO, but as a son, as a citizen, as a human being who wanted to give back. When Sundar finished speaking, there was silence on the line. Then Modi said, "I will help. Not for the headlines, but for the hearts." Within a week, meetings were arranged, policies discussed. Journalists tried to find leaks, but no one knew the full plan. Sundar kept everything quiet until it was ready. Meanwhile, Lakshmi returned to her regular routine. She visited temples, helped neighbors, and even taught a few young girls in the area how to read English letters. She didn't tell anyone about the foundation. She didn't need to. Her life had always been about doing, not declaring. One afternoon, Sundar sat with her again on the balcony. "Do you ever regret not doing more for yourself?" he asked. She laughed softly. "What more do I need? I raised 2 boys. I saw the world through your eyes. I prayed with joy, not with need. But your dreams," she interrupted gently. "My dream was never for me. It was always for you." Those words stayed with him long after she went inside. That night, Sundar sat under the stars again. But this time, he was not alone. He invited a small group of friends from his old school. Not tech leaders, not billionaires, just friends. Ramesh, who ran a tiny mobile repair shop. Kavitha, who taught dance. And Subbu, who had become a school principal in a village nearby. "Why us?" Ramesh asked, a little nervous. "Because you are the roots," Sundar said. "You understand what matters. I need you to help design this foundation. I don't want people from Silicon Valley telling me what poor kids need. I want people who lived it." They talked for hours. They shared stories of students who walked miles to school, of parents who skipped meals to buy pencils, of villages with no internet, no books, but still full of dreams. This can't just be a scholarship, Kavitha said. It has to be a movement. And it became one. Within 2 months, the Lakshmi Foundation launched quietly, without a press conference. It began with 30 children from different parts of India. Not the toppers, not the famous schools, but kids whose applications came with handwritten letters and shaky drawings. One girl wrote, "I want to be a doctor so I can fix my mother's back." A boy wrote, "I want to make a computer that works with voice because my father lost his hands in a factory fire." Every story was a mirror of Lakshmi's sacrifices. Every child was a piece of Sundar's past. He flew to the first orientation session, but this time he didn't give a speech. Instead, he sat quietly with the children and their parents. He watched, he listened, and when one little boy came up to him and said, "Sir, my mama also sold her gold to send me here," Sundar bent down, held his hand, and said, "You are already rich." That evening, as the children laughed and played, Sundar stood near the door with Lakshmi. "You did this," she said softly. "No," he replied, "you did." She smiled, placing her hand on his shoulder. "Then we did it together. And somewhere, between the past and the future, between tears and laughter, between silence and promise, a new story began, one built not on machines, but on moments." Weeks passed. The foundation began to grow, not with noise, but with care. Sundar refused to make it about him. He didn't allow his face on posters. He didn't give interviews. All he wanted was for the focus to stay on the children and their dreams. Every Saturday, Sundar and Lakshmi visited the small building they had turned into the foundation's first learning center. It was simple, painted white, with blue windows, a single floor, and a garden where children planted flowers beside vegetables. There was no signboard, no logo, just a tiny brass plate on the side wall, written in Tamil, which translated to, "A place where dreams are watered." One morning, as Sundar helped arrange books in the small library, a volunteer handed him a brown envelope. "This came in the post," she said. "No return address." Inside the envelope was a photograph. It showed a small village school, a dirt floor, 4 children sitting under a broken roof. On the back, in neat handwriting, were just 5 words. "Please, don't forget about us." No name, no location, no request for money. Sundar stared at the photo for a long time. He felt something stir inside him, a feeling he hadn't felt in years. Not sadness, not pity, responsibility. He walked outside and showed the photo to Lakshmi. She studied it quietly, her fingers brushing the edges. "This is not just a picture," she said. "This is a voice." "But how do we find them?" Sundar asked. Lakshmi smiled. "Start by listening." That evening Sundar called a friend who worked in rural education. Together, they traced the style of the classroom, the clothing, the trees in the background. Within days, they narrowed it down to a remote area in Andhra Pradesh. A week later, Sundar and Lakshmi flew there. No media, no announcement, just 2 travelers walking on red soil roads, asking questions from shopkeepers and school teachers. Finally, they found it. A small broken school on the edge of a village. 4 children still sat there each day, their teacher trying to teach without electricity, without desks, without even a full roof. When the teacher saw Sundar, he didn't recognize him at first. He greeted him like any visitor. "Do you need directions, sir?" he asked. "No," Sundar said gently. "I think we found the place we were looking for." When the teacher realized who he was, his eyes widened. "Sir, you came all the way here." "Someone sent us a picture," Sundar said, "and a message." The teacher looked stunned. "But we didn't write that." "Then someone who believes in you did." They sat under a neem tree, and the teachers shared the full story. The school had been waiting for government support for years. Many children had stopped coming. Some walked 5 kilometers to reach better schools. Others just stayed home. Lakshmi watched the children playing with stones and sticks. No phones, no books. Yet they smiled. She turned to Sundar and said, "Build something here. Not just a building. Build hope." He nodded. In the months that followed, the village changed slowly. Not because of money alone, but because Sundar made sure the foundation worked with the people, not above them. They built a solar-powered classroom, a small library with books in English and Telugu, laptops donated by volunteers, and more importantly, trained young locals to teach. The wall of the school stayed bare, except for one new addition, the photo, framed in wood. It hung near the door with the words below, "One voice can wake the world." Lakshmi stood before it one day, her hands folded. A young girl walked up to her and asked, "Auntie, is that your school?" Lakshmi smiled. "No, child. This is your school now." But as the foundation grew, so did the weight on Sundar's heart. He began receiving letters, hundreds of them, stories from across the world, some hopeful, some desperate. Children from Brazil, Kenya, Pakistan, and Nepal. Families asking for help. Teachers asking for support. One letter read, "My brother died walking to school. The bridge collapsed. But," he used to say, "one day someone will notice us." Another said, "I make chalk from crushed stones. Please send real chalk so my students can write again." The volume of need began to feel overwhelming. One night, Sundar sat in his office. The letters spread across the floor. He felt small again. Not like the man on magazine covers. Not like the leader of a global company. Just a boy from Chennai, trying to understand why the world still ignored its brightest lights. Lakshmi walked in quietly. "You cannot fix everything," she said softly. "But I want to," he whispered. "Then don't try to fix the world. Try to lift it." He looked up. "What's the difference?" "Fixing means control," she said. "Lifting means believing." That night, Sundar made a decision. The foundation would expand not as a large machine, but as a circle of small fires, people helping people. One region at a time, with care, with love, with belief. He called it the firefly model. "A single firefly is small," he explained later. "But when hundreds glow together, the night becomes less lonely." Months turned into a full year. The Lakshmi Foundation, once a quiet idea scribbled in a notebook, had now lit sparks in villages and towns across India. And yet, Sundar didn't let it become loud. He stayed away from media coverage, choosing instead to let the work speak for itself. But something unexpected happened. People began to copy the model. Not companies, not politicians, but ordinary people. A retired nurse in Kerala started a small scholarship from her pension. A farmer in Gujarat gave part of his harvest to fund books for a nearby school. A tailor in West Bengal taught children how to sew so they could support their families. None of them wanted praise. They had seen what one man, led by his mother, had done, and now they believed they could too. Sundar watched all this unfold from a quiet place. He often returned to the rooftop in Chennai, where the stars above reminded him how small and wide the universe was. One evening, as he looked up, Lakshmi brought him a small box wrapped in cloth. "What's this?" he asked. "Something I forgot to give you," she said. Inside the box were tiny folded papers, yellowed. By time Sundar unfolded the first one, it was a letter he had written at age 10. "I want to build a flying car," it said, "so Amma can fly to work." He laughed softly. Another note read, "I will be a big man, but I won't forget Chennai." He read them slowly, one by one, as Lakshmi sat beside him, her eyes closed, breathing in the night air. "You've always carried dreams," she said, "even when they scared you." Sundar nodded. I think the fear made them real. As he folded the letters back into the box, a phone call came. It was from Narendra Modi. Sundar, the Prime Minister said, "I want to ask you something, of course. Would you consider speaking again?" Sundar paused. "Where?" "At the National Youth Conference next month. It's not a formal speech, more like a conversation. The children have been asking to hear from you again." He hesitated. "Modi, ji, last time, I froze." "Yes," Modi replied, "and what happened next moved the entire country." Sundar looked at Lakshmi. She nodded gently, as if she already knew what the call was about. "I'll do it," Sundar said. The day of the conference arrived quickly. The venue was simple and open ground, with a large canopy, hundreds of students sitting cross-legged on mats. There were no fancy lights, no grand stages, just a microphone on a wooden stand, and a quiet breeze passing through the trees. Lakshmi sat in the second row. This time, she wore a pale blue sari. Her eyes sparkled, not with pride, but with peace. As Sundar stepped onto the stage, he looked out at the children. They weren't holding smartphones. They were holding notebooks. They weren't waiting to be entertained. They were waiting to be seen. He cleared his throat, the memory of his last silence still fresh. But this time, his heart was ready. "I want to tell you about failure," he began. The children sat up straighter. "When I first applied to join Google, I thought they would never choose me. I had no fancy clothes, no polished accent, no powerful connections. But I had one thing, a reason." He paused. "My reason was my mother. She believed in me when I didn't. And sometimes, that's all it takes, one person's belief." He looked over at Lakshmi. "We live in a world that celebrates perfection," he continued. "Perfect grades, perfect resumes, perfect faces. But let me tell you a secret. I have never met a perfect person who changed the world. Only broken people do." A hush moved across the crowd. "You don't have to wait to be rich or famous to make a difference. You just have to start. Help one child. Plant one tree. Lift one voice." He took a breath. "Fireflies are small, but they light up the dark." At that moment, as if the world was listening, the sun began to set, and the sky turned soft gold. Someone turned on tiny lanterns that hung from strings above the students. And slowly, the ground began to glow. Each student had been given a small solar-powered firefly light, handcrafted by the children in the Lakshmi Foundation's centers. One by one, they switched them on. Hundreds of tiny lights blinked across the field. Sundar stood still, overcome. He had imagined this moment once in his head, but standing inside, it was something else entirely. Then something happened that no one expected. Lakshmi stood up again, this time, not to hold his hand, but to speak. She walked toward the stage slowly. Sundar offered her his microphone. She looked at the children and said, "I studied only till class 10. I don't know much English. I don't know what words to use." A few smiled kindly. "But I know this," she said. "You are all my children. Not by blood, by dream." Tears filled more than a few eyes. "Go home," she continued. "Hug your mothers, say thank you, and promise them one thing, that you'll not only rise, but lift others too." The applause came like a wave, not loud, but strong. After the event, as the lights faded and the children left in quiet joy, a young girl approached Sundar and Lakshmi. She held a small notebook and asked shyly, "Can I ask something?" "Yes," Sundar said. "How do I know if I'm good enough?" Lakshmi smiled and said, "If you can ask that question, you already are." And in the quiet, starlit evening, with firefly lights still blinking in the trees, Sundar realized something powerful. His speech hadn't changed the world. His silence had, because in that silence, others found space to speak. The morning after the youth conference, Sundar woke up early. The air was still, filled with the soft sound of birds. He stepped onto the balcony of the guest house and looked out over the trees and rooftops of a small town that now held something Secreta, memory of light. He made tea for himself and his mother, just like she used to do for him as a boy. When Lakshmi joined him, she was barefoot, calm, and still glowing from the night before. I heard them whispering after your speech, she said, sipping the tea. They weren't talking about technology or your title. They were talking about kindness. Sundar nodded slowly. Then maybe we did something right. Lakshmi looked up, her eyes soft. You reminded them that it's okay to fall silent, as long as you rise again with purpose. Just then, Sundar's phone buzzed with a message. It was from the team at the Lakshmi Foundation. You need to see this. Attached was a short video clip, less than 30 seconds long. It had been recorded by one of the students who attended the conference. The video showed dozens of young people walking back to their villages, still carrying their firefly lights. But the twist was this: they weren't walking home alone. Each child had picked up a younger student or a sibling who hadn't been able to attend, and they were showing them the lights, retelling the speech, and handing out pages of notes they had taken. One girl sat under a tree, drawing a firefly in the dirt, while teaching her cousin what she had learned. There was no music, no editing, just raw, honest moments of children carrying light. Sundar stared at the screen for a long time. It's working, he whispered. Yes, Lakshmi said softly, and it's just beginning. 2 weeks later, Sundar returned to Silicon Valley, but he wasn't the same man who had left. He no longer felt like a global executive weighed down by strategy and deadlines. He felt like a son, a teacher, a servant of something much bigger. He walked into his office at Google with a small brass plate in his hand, the same words that were on the learning center wall in Chennai, a place where dreams are watered. He asked for it to be placed inside the company's main entrance, not as a symbol of charity, but as a daily reminder to everyone who walked through the doors. We build machines, he told his team, but we serve humans. Soon, the Firefly model began spreading beyond India. Grassroots movements lit up in Kenya, Vietnam, Colombia, and rural parts of the United States. Each center followed the same simple rule: small, local, personal. There were no big launch events, no celebrity endorsements. Just people, helping people. Then came the final moment, the one Sundar never expected. He received a call from the International Council for Education and Human Development. They wanted to honor him and Lakshmi for their contribution to building accessible, soul-centered education worldwide. The award was to be presented in Geneva. Lakshmi was hesitant. I don't need awards, she said. I'm happy seeing the children laugh. But they want to thank you, Sundar replied. They want to honor the one who believed first. Lakshmi finally agreed. At the award ceremony, the auditorium was filled with teachers, students, and activists from over 50 countries. Sundar walked to the stage with his mother, hand in hand. As he stepped forward to speak, he paused. For a long moment, he said nothing. The room went quiet. A few people exchanged confused glances, remembering the now famous moment when Sundar had once frozen during a speech. But then he spoke, calm and steady. Before I say anything, Sundar said, I want you all to take 10 seconds of silence. The audience obeyed. This silence, Sundar continued, is for every mother who sold her bangles, for every father who walked miles to find school books, for every teacher who taught under a leaking roof, for every child who believes they are not enough. The silence held weight, and when it lifted, Sundar continued, I stand here not as a leader of a company, but as a witness to love. This woman beside me, he looked at Lakshmi, taught me how to rise by teaching me how to serve. If I have built anything, it's only because she never stopped believing I could. Lakshmi was handed the award. She took it with both hands, smiled at the crowd, and said only one line, Thank you for seeing all the children we forget. The room stood, applauding her more than the trophy itself. After the ceremony, a young teacher from Nigeria approached Sundar and asked, Sir, do you really think fireflies can change the world? Sundar smiled. They already have. As he flew home, Sundar looked out of the plane window. Below, the world sparkled not with streetlights or buildings, but with stories he could now feel, even when he closed his eyes. He arrived back in Chennai just before dawn. Lakshmi opened the door, tired but joyful. They sat together on the rooftop, like always. "Amma," he said, "do you know what I'm most proud of?" "What?" "That I froze." She smiled. "Because that's when you remembered who you were." He nodded. "That silence taught me the most important thing," he said. "It's not how loud your voice is, it's what your heart says when no one's speaking." The sky slowly turned pink. The city began to wake, and in the stillness between night and day, mother and son sat side by side to fireflies among millions, lighting the world quietly. 5 years had passed since Sundar froze on that stage. What began as a single moment of silence became a global wave of compassion, connection, and purpose. The Lakshmi Foundation had grown into a network of over 200 learning centers across 16 countries. Each center was still small, still local, still humble, but each one carried the same soul: lift the unseen. The Firefly model had spread farther than Sundar had ever imagined. People didn't just adopt it, they adapted it. In Peru, a group of students started a mobile classroom on boats. In Rwanda, teachers taught under mango trees with solar projectors. In northern India, young girls from the Foundation's first batch were now teachers themselves. But the heart of it all stayed in Chennai, in the small house where Sundar had grown up. The house with the tin roof, the dusty walls, and the balcony that had seen dreams form under stars. One morning Sundar sat beside Lakshmi in that same balcony. She was older now, her steps slower, her voice softer, but her spirit sharp as ever. He brought out a photo album. "Look," he said, flipping pages. "This boy from Hyderabad built a new science lab in his village, and this girl from Darjeeling, she won a global poetry contest. All of them came from that first batch." Lakshmi ran her fingers over the photos. "They don't need to remember my name," she said. "They just need to remember that they matter." Sundar nodded. He then opened a blank page at the end of the album. Taped to it was a new photo, one he had taken the week before. It showed an elderly woman sitting under a tree, telling a story to a group of children who sat in a circle, eyes wide with wonder. Lakshmi looked at it closely. "Who is she?" she asked. Sundar smiled. "You," she laughed. "When did you take that?" "You were too busy telling the story." "What was I saying?" "You were telling them about the time I got lost at the railway station," he said, laughing. "You said I cried for an hour." "You did," she teased. They both laughed, the sound rising like a soft bell into the morning air. But behind the laughter was something unspoken. Lakshmi's health had been changing. Sundar noticed the longer rests, the slower movements, the pauses between sentences. She never complained. She never said she was tired. But Sundar knew. He began spending more time in Chennai, less boardrooms, more rooftops, less meetings, more morning tea. He brought teams from Google to learn from the Foundation's volunteers. Not to teach, but to listen. He started a new project. To record local languages from rural areas, preserving the stories, lullabies, and poems of forgotten communities. He called it the Voice Bank. One evening, Sundar asked Lakshmi, "If you could leave one message behind for every child in the world, what would it be?" She thought for a while, then she said quietly, "Be kind to your voice, and even kinder to someone else's." Sundar wrote it down. It became the final page of the Firefly Handbook, printed in over 40 languages. Then came the day the world paused. Lakshmi passed away quietly in her sleep, wrapped in the same blanket she used to cover Sundar with when he was a child. The news spread quickly, but Sundar made one request: no grand ceremony, just a simple prayer. a tree planted, and a promise renewed. Thousands of people across the world held their own quiet moments that day. In schools, in homes, in libraries. Children lit their firefly lights. Teachers read her story aloud. Mothers held their children closer. And for one full day, the world didn't chase speed, it sat still and remembered. A month later, Sundar stood once again on a stage, not to speak about the future, but to honor the past. The hall was filled with students, teachers, and volunteers from the foundation. He held the same microphone where years ago, his voice had stopped. He took a deep breath and said, "My mother once told me, silence is not empty, it's full of waiting." He paused. On that day, I thought my silence was failure. Now I know it was a doorway. He turned to the large screen behind him. A video played a montage of voices from around the world. Children reciting poems, mothers telling bedtime stories, old men sharing songs from their villages. Each voice different, each voice beautiful. As the screen faded to black, Sundar said his final words. "This story is not mine. It belongs to every child who was told they were not enough. It belongs to every parent who gave everything without asking for anything. It belongs to you." The lights dimmed, and once again, the firefly lights came on, held high in hundreds of hands, glowing, blinking, believing. As Sundar walked off the stage, someone asked him quietly, "What will you do now?" He smiled, "I'll keep walking. There's always one more firefly waiting to be found." And somewhere, in a quiet village, a child opened a letter from the Lakshmi Foundation, a letter that said, "We believe in you." The child looked up at the sky, saw a single firefly, blinked through the dark hand, smiled. Because sometimes, all it takes is one.